Welcome to Chess Dog. I'm John Montgomery, and today we've got a fun game, a bit of a diversion. You know, we've been swimming in a sea of World Cup match games with all, sort of cutthroat, very serious chess. I'm going to be one of the tournament directors for the upcoming U.S. class championship here towards the end of this week. It's all very heavy stuff, so I decided to play over a game that was fun. This is a game between the Botez sisters, Alexandra and Andrea, versus GothamChess, or Levy Rozman, as he's most well known. And in this particular game, you may have seen this game on GothamChess, his channel. There's no analysis of it, but we get to see the game. And it's Alexandra, the older of the Botez sisters, playing against Gotham and Andrea at the same time. Gotham and Andrea have the white pieces, and they're alternating moves. So Gotham makes the first move, Andrea makes the second move, he makes the third move, etc. They go back and forth, but they're playing Alexandra, and she's by herself. So it's a big disadvantage to have to go back and forth with the moves, and there's only 3 minutes on the clock for each side. So it's really crazy, and it's just a fun game. It opens up with Gotham making the move e4, and then Alexander responds with e6. We get the French defense on the board quickly. Then at Gotham, move 3 plays bishop to d3. A sideline against the French, but it's got some teeth. It's definitely not a bad move. And Alexander plays knight to f6. Probably the move white wants to see the most. Now white can gain space with e5, and the bishop is already aggressively placed along that bishop d3, h7 diagonal. The knight goes to d7, f4. Now white has a good position and a nice space advantage. Black attacks the base of the pawn chain with c5. White plays knight to f3. c3 was probably a little better, so that if black takes on d4, he could replace it with a pawn, but that's okay. Black plays knight to c6, c3, supporting the pawn, a6, hoping to maybe gain some space on the queen side with b5. It's Andrea's move now in the back and forth, and she plays a4, and this is the novelty of the game, and it's a good move. It stops b5 from being played. Alexandra takes on d4, then plays bishop to b4 check. Andrea plays knight to c3. Black plays queen to b6, then bishop to e3 to defend and support the d4 pawn. Black plays queen to a5, and Andrea plays queen to b3. An interesting line is if white goes ahead and castles here and sacrifices that c3 pawn, it's actually pretty good for white. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes c3, rook to c1, queen to a3, rook to a1, queen to c3. Then if rook to b1, the knight goes, say the knight goes to b4 to hit that bishop at d3, then rook to b3, and the queen is pushed away, and the knight on b4 would be lost if white had castled. But instead, white plays queen to b3, both sides castle, and then black plays f5 and gets this nice structure here in the center with pawns at d5, e6, and f5. But this structure can be fragile too. It looks strong, but it's vulnerable to sacrifices. In fact, in this position, the best move is to go ahead and play g4, and then if pawn takes pawn, knight to g5 threatens the h7 pawn and e6. Andrea plays knight to g5. Black plays rook to e8, defending the e6 pawn, and this was Gotham's move, and he just plays g4 instantly. I mean, without even thinking, he knows that that's the best move, or at least the most obvious move. As it turns out, one slightly better move might be bishop takes f5, a piece sacrifice, because if white takes, black takes the bishop, then knight to d5. You've won 2 pawns, and you've got this discovered attack against the king. Potential line is if the king moves to h8, knight to f7 check, king to g8, knight to c7, forking the 2 rooks. And then if black takes the knight, you get the classic smothered mate. Knight h6 check, king h8, queen to g8 check, rook g8, knight to f7 check. So taking with the bishop at f5 might have been slightly better. Obviously, no one's going to see that in a 3-minute game, but I thought it was an interesting line. Gotham played g4. h6 was played. Now, in this point, Levy Rozman sees that there's clearly one move that gives white a big advantage. And, you know, they're not telling each other what moves to play because that would go against the spirit of going alternating moves. But he said, just play it, just play it, just play it. And Andrea does play it. The sacrifice is knight to e6. And now white is just winning. After rook takes, pawn takes, and that clump of pawns just dominates. Even though white's down a piece, he's got those 2 pawns, and that clump of central pawns just gives white a winning advantage. Black plays rook to e8. White plays knight to d5. Won that pawn, and now there's still this discovery potential along that long diagonal against the king at g8. White's totally winning here. But it's a blitz time control, and they still have to alternate moves. King moves out of the way. Now, Levy plays king to h1 to open up the g file, bishop to f8, rook to g1, putting pressure on that half-open file. The knight goes to b4 to harass the bishop at d3, bishop to e4 to protect the knight on d5 and not allow that bishop to be exchanged. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5. Now, Alexandra, in a very slow time, excuse me, a very fast time control, not a lot of time to think, plays a very creative move, knight to f6, and really dynamic. It looks like the knight cannot be taken because of rook takes bishop at e3, and if queen takes rook, then the queen at a5 would take the bishop at d5, something along these lines of ef6, rook e3, and if the queen recaptures, queen d5 check. However, as it turns out, the best move is to take the knight. But it's really sharp stuff. If rook takes e3, what you do, you don't recapture that rook on e3, you play f takes g7 check. Bishop takes g7, f6. Now in this position, if black recaptures, then rook to g8 check, king to h7, queen to c2 check. And after bishop to f5, queen takes f5 is checkmate. After f6, black could play bishop to e6 to clear the back rank, but then bishop fg7 check, king h7, bishop takes e6, and then rook takes queen. You queen the pawn, rook g8, bishop g8 check, king h8, bishop takes b3. And yes, this is computer analysis. And in this position, the computers declare mate in 14. And no, we're not going to look at it, just to let you know. But I just thought that was a fun variation. As it turns out, the move knight to f6 was a technical error, but obviously we live in the real world. No one's going to see that. So the bishop is retreated to f3. The knight goes to g8. Now here, white makes a mistake. This is Andrea's move, and she plays bishop to h5. And after this, white's advantage is actually completely gone. The better move was queen to f7, then a queen d8, f6, and if the pawn captures pawn, it's actually mate at g8. So that queen f7 was the better move. The problem with bishop to h5 is now bishop takes f5. And there's always these threats of the bishop going to e4 with check, and all those light squares in the center are really weak. So now the advantage has shifted. Queen takes b7. It's not about grabbing the pawn, it's about controlling this long diagonal. There's a fight over that diagonal. Whoever can control that, and if black can give a check, black's going to be in great shape, so white wants to keep that under control. Rook a to b8, queen to c6, rook to e6, continually trying to push the queen away from the diagonal. She goes to f3, has to stay on that diagonal. Rook takes b2, bishop to f7, rook e7, hitting that bishop. The bishop comes to g6. Now, white would be fine trading off, if black traded off that bishop, but black doesn't want to. Black wants that bishop for the diagonal. Goes to bishop to c8, wanting to play bishop to b7. White plays bishop to e4. Now the time pressure is beginning to take its toll, and black goes from now completely winning to completely lost instantly after the next move. And there's just a few seconds left on the clocks. Queen to c3. Now, what's the winning move for white? Rook A to c1, and that is the move Gotham plays. The queen goes to a3, and now it's Andrea's move. And the right move, of course, is rook takes bishop at c8. But she plays what probably is the worst move on the board. Queen to h3, double exclamation mark. Now, the bishop at c8 can capture the queen at h3. So white dropped the queen. But now it's just a mad scramble, right? None of this means anything at all. Just a few seconds left on the clock. Rook c to e1 to defend the bishop at e3. Queen to c3. The bishop goes to f3. The queen goes to c2, threatening mate on h2. The rook to e2, queen c3, rook g to e1, rook takes e2, rook takes e2, queen to a1 check. And now with just a few seconds, it's Andrea's move, and she doesn't see how to get out of this. She's thinking, oh, it must be mate, it must be mate. And Gotham's like, no, there's a move, there's a move. And she finally makes it. Bishop to g1, blocking the check. Then rook to c7. Rook e1, black should of course just take the rook, but follows the plan that she already had in place with just a very few seconds left. Rook c1, queen c1, bishop g2, then on bishop g2 check, completely winning position, up 2 minor pieces plus a queen, and the attack. Black's flag falls. Alexandra Botez's flag falls, and she loses this very fun game played in the park. I hope you enjoyed this game, the analysis of this game, and be sure to join us again at Chess Dog, perhaps for something more serious. Maybe not. We'll see. Talk to you later. Bye.